Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for today's video, we're going to be focusing on what is the best bleed build in Elden Ring, showing off a whole bunch of the best bleed builds, and then ultimately deciding what the best bleed build in Elden Ring all around is in this video. And for this character is on Journey 15. I actually thought it was on Journey 16. Apparently it was on 15. You're going to show at the end of the video the journey I'm on. I had to kill a rune bear for a larval tear because I had to respec a couple times, so I ran around and got a bunch of those. And yeah, the rune bears are really annoying to fight. I got lucky there, but generally speaking, they're very tough to fight. First up, we're going to go through the dagger build, which does quick bleed, and it's really powerful. First thing, obviously, to show is how much damage it does after you put them to sleep. It absolutely shreds them. It can annihilate them, and of course you have that L1 that's so quick hitting and does a lot of damage and bleed when combined together, building up on those successive attack hits, get a good amount of damage, and obviously you can proc bleed very fast with the daggers. But is it the #1 bleed build to run around with a Reduvia and an offhand knife and blood? No, not really, because the damage in between procs isn't fantastic, and even in some circumstances there's ways to proc bleed faster. This is a really powerful build, but it doesn't quite add up to the #1 bleed build in Elden Ring. Don't get me wrong, I had a lot of fun with the daggers in general. I enjoyed them. They're a ton of fun to use, and being able to hit so quickly makes it all the more powerful. They really truly are a lot of fun to use, and obviously in this instance, you can absolutely shred bosses with this, and it makes the game a lot easier being able to get in so many hits so quickly. This is definitely top 10, maybe even top 5. However, it's not the best. Next up, Moghwyn Sacred Spear. Now, Moghwyn Sacred Spear is incredibly powerful. It's one of my favorite weapon arts in Blood Boon Ritual in the entire game. It's extremely powerful to use. It can be buffed like crazy, and it does immense fire damage and bleed. But there's a little bit of issues with Moghwyn Sacred Spear. The issue here is it's not building up on successive attacks. You can boost the damage a lot with the Shard and the Fire Scorpion Charm, but it leaves you a standing target and vulnerable in a lot of instances. Shreds HP, but it is not #1. Next up, the Godskin Peelers. People have told me about this one for pure AR, and much like the Twinblades, I tried both two-handing each one of those as well, and I was able to proc bleed pretty much just as fast as the jump attacks, which is cool that you can do that now since they up the speed of Twinblades. However, the damage in between procs isn't quite there, which leaves the Godskin Peelers, at least in my opinion, out and not the first one. Because after the first two initial bleed procs, which you'll get fairly quickly, after that it becomes harder and harder to proc bleed. After the first two procs, for instance, if the first one's 300, the next one's 500, 700, and as it goes up, if you're not doing that much damage in between procs, it's not making up for the damage in between, essentially, and you're losing out on what can absolutely shred bosses with, for instance, some of the curved swords. Same problem with the Twinblades here have. A lot of hits, 6 hits on the jump attacks. Obviously, that's a ton. Can proc bleed very fast, but the AR and the damage isn't quite there. And now the Beastmen curved swords versus the Scavenger curved swords. I wanted to try both of these. First up is the Beastmen curved swords, which you're going to see here, and they do a fairly good amount of damage. We did a decent amount of damage to the troll there. We're going to test this now with the Scavengers on a same relative build at 150. For the Beastmen, we have to invest in 2 stats, 60 strength and 40 arcane, but for the Scavengers, we're going on a cult with 80 arcane. Now, for the Beastmen, what happened was we ended up with 1,600, 8,000, and then 10,000. You're going to see something different here with the Scavengers, where the first hit's around 3,800, 9,000, and then with a little bit of a miss there, I think on one of the hits at the end, we still ended up with 10. It probably would have been more. Now let's jump into Greyoll to test this again. As we continually do jump attacks here, you're going to notice the beginning of the clip is missing in this one. That's because I clipped it at a minute. You're going to see a little bit of difference here with the Scavenger curved swords. I wanted to see what build is best around the 150 range because so many people play in that range of level 150, even upwards of 200, which is better. So I tested on the big dragon and Caelid to see how quickly we can take him down. And ultimately, missing 1 or 2 jump attacks in the beginning of this footage, I clocked this around 51 seconds. So I'm figuring probably in total about 52, maybe 53 seconds for the Beastmen curved swords to take down the big dragon and Caelid. Interestingly, this is a boss that actually would lean typically towards the Beastmen curved swords, you'd think, because he's so slash resistant. The majority of damage that we're going to get is from bleed procs, right? Well, after clocking this between 51 and 53 seconds, I'm going to show the stats on screen. We use no buffs, by the way, only our tier, the successive attack tier, the thorny tier, and then this exact setup. The stats are on the side, by the way, and we went for 60 strength and 40 arcane, and having good strength scaling is good, but let's see how the scavenger curved swords do for the majority of players in the game that are going to be around that 150 range. Let's see how they hold up. Now, I had a lot of comments this week, a ton of comments this week regarding these specific swords, the Beastmen curved swords and then the Scavenger curved swords, people going back and forth trying to figure out which one's best. I do most of my builds generally between level 125 and 200, so for me, I'm going to keep it meta relevant. As far as meta relevant stuff goes, as we go throughout the Scavengers here, you're going to come to the same conclusion probably that I did based on the Troll and the Giant Dragon and Kaled. You notice the DPS in between procs is way better. It's substantially better if you can see the damage up there in the top left-hand corner as we go throughout this. And by the end of this, I end up clocking this at about 48 to 49 seconds versus between 51 and 53. And that's about a 3 to 5 second difference or so as far as these two go, which ultimately makes me think that I initially was right about this. By the way, same stats, equipment, and everything. As we get into this, the Scavenger Curved Sword bleed build is still the best bleed build in Elden Ring. Ultimately, I came to that conclusion based on the fact that we're able to do around 3,000 damage per jump attacks, get reasonable amounts of procs, and the DPS in between is unmatched at meta levels around 150. I factored in several different things here. Another one that I factored in is the fact that you have to invest in singularly one stat, literally one stat. On a cult for the Scavenger Curved Swords, get to 80 arcane, and you can absolutely shred every single boss in the game, even on New Game Plus 7 like here. And for the Beastmen curved swords, for the Bandit curved swords, for many of the others in general, since they don't have the innate bleed on them, you have to go with two stats, whether that's dexterity and arcane or strength and arcane, versus just one individual stat that will allow you to shred every boss in the game. And up until incredibly high levels, and once again, if you get to ridiculously high levels, you can make almost any build work. You can even beat out the damage on the Scavenger curved swords, I believe, by having 99 arcane and 99 dexterity with the Bandit curved swords. But again, these are levels that a lot of people now aren't playing at. A lot of people do have max level characters, but they have side characters that they use for the meta and whatnot. I'm not saying everybody's not playing at max level. There's a whole bunch of people that play at all different levels, which is great. But there's a lot of people, a good majority, that are playing between 100 and 200. And for that, the Scavenger Curved Sword bleed build wins every time. And when it comes to enemies that are immune to bleed like the final boss, you will have no trouble with the Scavenger Curved Sword bleed build because guess what? On a cult, it sacrifices no damage and can absolutely shred the both of them. This is one of the best builds in Elden Ring. It's always been top 3 for me, and it still is. And as you level up and you reach really high levels, another suggestion that I have is instead of going for a little bit more damage, maybe a little bit more bleed, you can start to invest in using a lot of faith for buffs, using different incantations, or even mixing in spells to your build while still only have to invest in one stat for the Scavenger Curved Sword bleed build, just arcane for that occult. And then that beast scaling gives you so much damage on the jump attacks. You're going to see me shred half of Elden Beast's HP on max scaling just in the first run before he takes off. They absolutely obliterate anything they're even nearby. The Scavenger Curved Sword bleed build is unreal. This was all, by the way, all this testing, including Elden Beast, Radagon, Godfrey. It was all fresh footage that I put together over the course of the week, and guess what? It didn't take many tries for either. Godfrey weirdly took 2 because I had to practice the jump attacks, which is rare for me. He's usually quite easy. And Elden Beast and Radagon, I believe, took either 2 or 3, somewhere in that vicinity as well. But once again, continued to miss Radagon several times with the jump attacks. But once I got them down, was able to do it better. I was able to get ridiculous amounts of damage and shred the both of them. And again, I'll put together data after data. If somebody asks me to try this on different bosses, I will try them with several different things again. I know lately some people keep commenting that you can single-hand twin blades, and that is a good way to fast proc, but the damage in between procs isn't going to be nearly as good as this. Again, we're going for DPS here, damage per second. Scavenger Curved Sword bleed build isn't just the best bleed build in the game, it's also the smartest bleed build in the game. And if we were to test it, we would come to the same results around meta level, all the way up till 200, and maybe even a while after that. I believe it's the smartest bleed build because of the high DPS, because it ignores those harder to get later procs, and because enemies and bosses that are immune to bleed will get shredded every time by the Scavenger Curved Swords. Also, I just want to mention real quick, if you're not subbed and you love overpowered PvE builds, be sure to sub to this channel. And if you are into Discord or use Discord at all, definitely be sure to check out this Discord. We have a really active Elden Ring Discord right now. Ton of people on there. It's been awesome. That's in the description below. As we beat up Elden Beast on Journey 15, I'm going to show you what journey it is at the end here. It's really just incredible. Like I said, they win every time. For me, the Scavenger Curved Sword Bleed build is still #1. They absolutely shred, and personally, I can't change to anything else or recommend anything else. If you're staying meta level, Scavenger Curved Swords every time. There's on screen right there, as you can see it. We were on Journey 15 going into 16 max scaling, and let's get into equipment. We have 2 Scavenger Curved Swords on a Colt for that awesome 1 single scaling and high damage. We have the White Mask, Raptor's Black Feathers, Claw Talisman, Blisten's Prosthesis, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, and then we have the Thorny tier and the Faith tier for buffs as well. And getting into stats here, as you're going to see the stats on screen, we are heavily invested in Arcane because of that occult scaling, and obviously went for a decent amount of vigor, a decent amount of endurance and mind, and we have a lot of flexibility given one stat. If you're going to be in the meta range, Scavenger Curved Sword Bleed build is a way to go. Still the #1 that I'd recommend, and it's still the one that I find the easiest out of all the bleed builds. So when people ask me what the best bleed build is, I'm going to say Scavenger Curved Sword Bleed build. And I hope this video helps answer that question. And let's get into the buffs that I normally do that I didn't do for the testing, but I do for most bosses. For buffs, this is what we're going to do. We're going to drink our tear because it's the longest duration, and then we're going to use Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength. If you want to throw in Blessing's Boon for some extra HP, that's up to you. And refill our FP. I'm on Xbox, so for me it would be Y and L1, and then Y and R1 back, so that we can proc Seppuku on both. That way we get as much bleed as possible, and then we can jump into literally those jump attacks for massive damage. By the way, for those that may be thinking that it was a little bit fluky as far as the Dragon and Troll, keep in mind I tested both of them 10 times each, never could get the one with the Beastmen Curved Swords inside of a minute, was able to do the Scavenger Curved Swords inside of a minute pretty much every single time. Now, that does factor in running back to the Grace, of course, which takes another 5 seconds or so, but even so, the Scavenger Curved Swords won every single time, and I tried it 10 times for each. If you're not subbed, by the way, definitely sub to this channel if you love overpowered PvE builds. There's an awesome library of builds now. I hope I ended this debate, at least as far as my channel goes. For meta levels, it's the Scavenger Curved Swords all the way. Be sure to check out the Discord. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will catch you guys there.